Psychoanalysis, Surreal in the Lacanian real. Our discussion today is on the concept of the Lacanian real and my concept of the surreal, and how it is necessary to bring the two in contact and see how the conceptualization of the surreal helps us in elaborating, clarifying some aspects of the Lacanian real, and how the two together can help us to create a more comprehensive model of the mind. Initially, I will start with some elaboration on some key Lacanian concepts, and then bring them together into my model of the mind. We'll do the same for Beyondian concepts if time permits, and then try to integrate them into a larger model of the mind, more comprehensive model of the mind. I define the real very differently from the way Lacan defines it. I use the word surreal and real in the context that the real is two things. One, it is pure logic, and two, it is everything that is banal, compulsory, and painful in life. Not painful, but at least banal and compulsory in life. The boring, not boring in the sense of that being a strong effect, but in the sense of something being banal. So the real here is something which is pure logic, pure fact, or something banal of everyday living. Something we do as a compulsion. And the surreal is defined as that where imagination has colored pure logic, imagination has colored the understanding and expression of an event, a factual event. So imagination has colored the fact, the logic, pure logic or the pure fact in terms of its reception, understanding or expression or experience. And that part of life where we feel something juicy, positive or negative, something not banal, something exhilarating, something exciting, something ecstatic, or even something tragic, but something not banal. That is the surreal. Surreal to me is a movement, a feature, a characteristic of the mind, and also a large part of the content of the mind, and a large part of what is generated in the mind. The mind is fundamentally dramatic, fundamentally melodramatic, fundamentally histrionic, fundamentally finding it difficult to be on a state of austere optimum logic. Mind as a mechanism is fundamentally not a mechanism of precise balance, not a mechanism of precise logic. The surreal therefore pervades the psyche. The surreal content, the surreal tendency, the surreal material pervades the psyche. Even when we think, even when we write, even when we're writing a book of physics, a book of mathematics, we want to give it a very juicy, evocative title. We want the surreal there to be such that the metaphorical title impresses others, evokes feelings, evokes something surreal. So surreal is not only what Dali does or a movement in painting, it's everywhere. All of art functions in the surreal. That is not all. What we call thinking also has surreal woven into it, which we don't realize. And we actually have to do great effort to extract pure logic, the pure real out of the surreal. Because the default condition is the surreal pervades the real, it infuses the real, it diffuses across the real. Often it distorts the real so much that what we see is only the surreal and the real is put aside. Pure logic is able to escape the surreal only with great effort, only when we consciously think and rethink in more elemental terms, more clarifying terms, and we remove the emotional and the dramatic, the aesthetic from pure logic, that only pure logic remains. Otherwise, by default, it's all together. The pure logic suffused with the aesthetic, suffused with the melodramatic, suffused with affect, suffused with expectations. So we really have to work consciously hard and put quite some energy and time to extract the real out of the surreal and see the pure real, pure logic, pure fact. The surreal is everywhere, inside the mind and outside. Outside every billboard that you see is an entity of the surreal. You see surreal there on every billboard, every advertisement, every newspaper headline. Somebody has tried to make it juicy, make it impressive, make it aesthetic. Desire is mostly in the surreal. A small part of desire is in the real. The desire of pure knowledge, pure thought, the desire of beauty in the austerity of mathematics or pure logic, the desire in the pure knowledge or pure science, or the ordinary low intensity desire that gets satisfied in banality of every day. But 90% of desire is in the surreal. It is expressed in the surreal inside, and we try to fulfill, soaked in the surreal outside. The surreal is natural and in the unconscious and conscious both. And this is where the surreal as a concept pervades the Lacanian real, imaginary, and the symbolic, all of them. There is a surreal component in all of them. The symbolic is not pure logic. The symbolic is not pure fact. The way the big other expresses also has a component of surreal. The big other is not pure logic, free of the surreal. The big other, especially religion of the big other, is all soaked in the surreal. The culture of the big other, including the language, is soaked in the surreal. Surreal is in our unconscious mind. How it operates, we'll see in a moment. But what we realize at the first sight is surreal is a universal, incurable addiction. By great efforts, for certain moments, we can remove the surreal and be with pure real only for a few moments with great effort. Otherwise, the default condition, 99.9% of the times, is that we are soaked in the surreal less or more. And surreal is a universal, incurable addiction for humanity. It is not necessarily wrong or bad, but it is descriptively speaking what it is. Can we really endure the real without the surreal? Does surreal not make life worth livable? Of course, yes. So the surreal is not something to be condemned, it's something to be admired. So when I say a universal incurable addiction, it is a positive addiction, something very positive, something admirable, something which is a virtue, not really a vice in the sense of an addiction. The point is to know its operation and to optimize it so that its side effect of often blinding us from that one can be freed. Because a surreal is mostly positive, but occasionally it can have a negative outcome of blinding us and not allowing logic to come in. That is where the destructive fanaticism comes up in various aspects of life. But mostly, surreal is on the positive side. It helps us to endure the real and allows us to carry on with living. Coming now to the Lacanian real, which is very different from the way I define the real. Lacanian real is a register. Lacan describes the mind using the concept of three registers: the real, the imaginary, and the symbolic. And when we bring together my concept of the surreal and the Lacanian real, the surreal is present in all the three: real, imaginary, and symbolic. Neither of them is a register of pure logic or pure fact. When we take up something soaked in the surreal and we wish to separate the surreal, it can be done only with great conscious effort, and often it is beyond our capability because that calls for very sharp conceptual capability of deconstruction. Also, it is very tiring and painful to do so. So most often we don't want anything purified of the surreal. It's a taste most of us don't have. The core of the surreal, there are two core elementals when we talk about the surreal. Why should the surreal exist in the first place? And operationally, how does the surreal operate in terms of its process? There are two very important elements related to the surreal. One, the source of the surreal in terms of origin. The surreal originates because of desire, like everything else in psyche. Desire satisfies itself not in a banal, vanilla, or real way, but desire has a desire to satisfy itself in colors and flavors of variety. And what is important here is imagination plays a key role. So desire satisfies itself not in a monochromatic way, in a hardwired way. For some species, desire is completely hardwired. For the human species, it is open. There is an element of subjectivity and a possibility of great variety. Desire uses imagination and other epistemological and affective elementals, cognitive elementals and affective elementals to create objects, scenarios, contexts in the mind, both in the unconscious and in the conscious. In Lacanian terms, in the real, imaginary, and symbolic. And desire satisfies itself through that route. And here we have to classify imagination into two parts. There is an imagination which is associated with pure logic, where it is at work silently in deduction. When we are doing pure logical deduction, the imagination involved, we can term that as logic imagination. And the logic imagination is the imagination at work independent of the surreal. But usually imagination is at the service of the surreal. Imagination creates those psychic states of surreal. So imagination is a key elemental which is necessary for desire to create something surreal. Maybe a surreal object, a surreal desire, or a surreal situation inside the mind or outside. So once we divide imagination into two, logic imagination, which is associated with pure logical functioning, and imagination in general, which is associated with the surreal. So when we say imagination, usually we mean imagination associated with the surreal, the general imagination. And when imagination exceptionally functions, we can call it logic imagination. So we use the general word as it is, and its exceptional working we term as logic imagination. Desire through elementals, and by this we mean motivational elementals, cognitive process elementals, affective process elementals, resultant elementals, which I have described in my model of the mind. Through those elementals, desire is at work in the real and in the rest of the state. So desire works even in the real. In the way experience happens in the real, and in the way desire happens in the real, and in the way juisa happens in the real. There are evaluating elements, evaluating operations. There are association operations. There are imagination operations. There are affect creating operations. And there are cognitive operations. And in those operations, we see the surreal operations taking place. And the surreal entities being generated, surreal objects being pursued, surreal objects being created, surreal infused into objects, surreal infused into events, surreal sought in events. The surreal therefore infuses the real. The real is not pure logic or pure fact. There is a imagination in the real, pre-verbal, and later on, maybe even verbal. If we define the real as a formal category where the verbal just can't enter, then we will have to say that before and after language, the non-verbal happens in the real. But the non-verbal still has the surreal. It is not pure logic or pure fact. And that is what makes real the most alive part of our psyche. Unattenuated, most alive. And real has quite some melodrama. And it's one of the most melodramatic places in the unconscious. So now that we bring together the concept of my surreal and the Lacanian real, it opens up space for other deductions, conceptual elaboration, and development of concepts. And slowly we will do that and move towards a more comprehensive model of the mind. Thank you.